A little more of the prophet Daniel. That's just fine. All right. Welcome to everybody to Bible class this morning. If you're just coming in and grabbing a seat, there are lesson sheets available. It's the same one we had a couple of weeks ago. We didn't get all the way through it, and so we're going to pick up basically where we left off. And if you are online and you want to get a copy of the lesson sheet, that's available at the church website, and all you have to do is go there and click on the PDF, and it will appear as if by magic on your screen. And for those of you who are here in the room, if you have a question during Bible class, all you have to do is stick your hand in the air, and we will be happy to hear what you have to say. For those who are online, again, we will check the emails that are coming in so that we can talk about your questions as well. All right. Talkative group. Everybody's awake this morning from having shoveled snow, and we're all ready to go here this morning. All right. A few things just to kind of get our brains warmed up and maybe have a little chuckle as we start the process this morning. We've announced in the bulletin, and we're deeply, deeply thankful for this, that all of the funds have come in that we need to renovate the last of the washrooms in the building that needs renovating. Those are the ones over by the gym, and they are in big need of a refresh over there. And so the Board of Properties have turned their attention to the fixtures that we will be getting, and here is one option that they have floated out for the men's room. These are called Wagner tubas. They're a relative of the French horn. French horn players are sometimes called to play Wagner tubas. We aren't doing that. Don't worry. Don't worry. But we have decided that if there is any money left over after we've done the bathrooms, the next step is the kitchen. And we've lined up one of these to put in the kitchen. All right. Actually, no. We're just getting the guy with the mustache beside it. He's just going to come and stand there. All right. Valentine's Day is Friday. Guys, don't forget. If you do forget to make that reservation to go out for dinner, or maybe that's just not your thing, I do have a recipe suggestion for you that will go a long way. In which direction, I'm not sure. That is your basic wiener sawn in half and twisted around like a heart with a toothpick through it and put over Kraft Dinner. It's a great. I've got more recipes like this if you would like.
I'll stick with borscht.
You might go back to the borscht. Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to see. This is for you. We're going to see how awake you are here this morning. Okay. Can you tell me what is wrong with this hymn? It's a hymn we know. It's a hymn we sing. We don't sing it all the time, but we sing it a few times a year. Take a close look and see if you can tell me what is wrong with that hymn. I had to look twice when I saw it on Facebook. I started just singing the hymn, and I thought, okay, well, this is all fine. Yes, immoral, invisible, God only wise. Yes. And it's sort of like back in my last church, we had lay readers, which was sometimes very, very good because we had some people who could read exceptionally well, and sometimes just a great big adventure. One of the guys that would come up and read had the bad habit of adding a few comments to the readings that were sort of more in line with his view of the world than maybe what we were preaching and teaching in the church. Anyway, I had to go over and tell him to leave that part to me. Anyway, then we had another guy that got up, and instead of reading blessed immortality, you know where this is going, right? He spoke of blessed immorality. And the whole church was like, oh, that's very funny. And he didn't catch it, but I certainly did. All right. Yes, you can make mistakes like that very, very quickly. All right, let's get into Daniel here this morning. We've been poking our way through chapter 1. If you're wanting to follow along in the Bible, just as we recap this, I actually had the moment this morning and looked it up, but we're on page 855 in the Pew Bible, if that's helpful to you to follow along with the text. And we've covered the people going down into Babylon, Daniel among the very first of the exiles, perhaps more as a hostage than an exile. He was part of the cream of the crop of Judah that was taken before the main exile, about 20 years before the main exile. In fact, in 605 BC, the main exile doesn't happen until 586 BC. And so he's down there already 20 years almost by the time everybody else gets there. And one of the key things that we learn in chapter 1 is the Daniel and his 4 friends are going to be brought into the king's court. They're going to learn the Babylonian culture. The king's goal is to assimilate them, to make them Babylonians, so that when the subsequent wave of people come, there are their own people there already who have paved the way for the Judeans to become Babylonians. That was the plan. But Daniel and his 3 friends, they have a bit of a different agenda, and so they pray. We'll get back to that in just a half a second here. We said this last time. I got just a little bit ahead of myself in my talking. The question that would come to their minds and to the rest of the exiles as they came down in this situation is, do we assimilate? Do we do what the Babylonians want us to do and just become Babylonians and kind of give up the unique things about our faith and our life? Or do we completely try to insulate and separate ourselves off from the Babylonians? Or is there a third option? Well, the third way, I think, becomes clear to Daniel and to his friends as they do what we should all do in times when we face difficult decisions and interesting questions. They come to the Lord in prayer. And as for these 4 youths, this isn't out of the NIV, which you have in the pew, but out of the ESV. God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had this extra gift of understanding all visions and dreams. So God is leading them up a middle path, if you will. Not to assimilate and just forsake everything that they hold and trust, nor is he encouraging them to separate from society and just kind of hunker down and make the best of it for 70 years down there. He's actually encouraging them to engage the culture without losing their identity. To be, and we've talked about this a couple times, I'm just going to go over this very quickly, to be what Jesus will identify for us in the Sermon on the Mount, to be salt and light, to be people who live within the culture, but who do not necessarily follow all the ways of the culture, and who bring the salt that is needed, the light that is needed into the world around them. And Paul will put it even more very, very clearly in Romans chapter 12. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. So priority one, live a life that is holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to the world. Don't assimilate, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. And this word testing here implies that you're going to be in the culture. You're going to hear things and see things that don't necessarily fit the way you've been taught as God's people. And so you test those ideas. You go, all right, is there something from this that I can take? Must I reject it all? Where is the line here? And it is in that testing that we are not conformed to the world, but are transformed. And we put this little definition, it's on the lesson sheet, in bold print on page 2, and this is just about as far as, we got a little bit further than this 2 weeks ago. Being salt and light to the world and living a life that engages the culture is difficult. This is no easy thing. It's much easier to just swim along in the stream and kind of go where the world takes you. It's also maybe not quite as easy, but somewhat appealing to just pull away, hunker down, and hold on for better days. But this is difficult, to actually transform the culture. It requires Christians to be deeply, faithfully present in their surrounding culture, to know how the world is, and maintain a mentality of serving people rather than coercing, disparaging, or avoiding them, all without assimilating into the culture's ways or compromising the values of the gospel. That's not easy. It's a challenging thing. And we are, as we did talk about this a little bit last time, there are ditches on either side of that very narrow road. I mean, this is sort of Jesus telling us the way is narrow. The path isn't a super highway you've been asked to walk on, but a kind of a little trail, as pilgrims through this world, where we avoid the left ditch. And here I'm using some maybe a little bit political / theological labeling here. On the left ditch in the church, there's kind of this, whatever society says is acceptable, well, we'll make that acceptable in the church too. We won't get too hung up about, what we believed 50, 60, 100 years ago. We'll just sort of swim along in the stream, and the world sometimes sets the agenda for the church. On the other hand, there's the right ditch, and it may not be quite as apparent in Canada, but it's certainly something that the church is contending with south of the border in the U.S., with the rise of something called Christian nationalism, where Christianity and allegiance to the country are being blended together in a very interesting way. Back in the spring, I read a book about the rise of Christian nationalism in the U.S. And it was a fascinating / horrifying read to see how churches have taken up a particular social agenda, and it all gets wrapped up into kind of one individual who happens now to be the President of the United States. And, for right or for wrong, him being God's man to bring the U.S. And anybody else back to God again. And that's the right ditch, because you start mixing things up. You mix up the fact that there are two kingdoms. We talked about this last time. I won't draw it out again. But Luther taught there are two kingdoms, the kingdom of the right, which is the church, the kingdom of the left, which is the world. They're not, they interrelate with each other, but one doesn't ever take over the other. If one takes over the other, that, if society takes over the church, which is the left ditch, that doesn't work out very well. And if the church tries to take over society, that also doesn't work very well. These two kingdoms need to exist, and there needs to be engagement between the two, but not one taking over or forcing the agenda of the other. And so there are these ditches that need to be avoided. Kind of done the kind of the recap here. Any comments, questions, observations about what I've just laid out? Okay. I've been doing some reading. I've just picked up a fascinating book this week. It's more academic, maybe than I even thought, because I've had to look up a few words that are in it myself. But it's a book called Biblical Critical Theory. Biblical Critical Theory. It's a bit of a play on words and ideas that we've seen around in the world lately, like critical race theory and stuff like that. This is critical biblical theory. And what the author is doing is looking at how it is that we can engage the message of the Scriptures into the world today. And it's kind of my little companion as we've been working through these chapters. I'm not terribly far into it because it is slow going, let me tell you. But from him and a few other sources, I've picked up a few things, and we'll maybe come back to this as we go through the study. What does it mean to actually engage the culture? And I pulled a few things out here. Know the faith. First step in engaging the world around us, I would argue, is that we need to know what we believe. We need to know what our faith is all about. And increasingly in this world, we need, to be teaching, we need to be learning. I'm preaching to the choir here because you're here. But Bible class, Bible study, worship attendance, these are the places where we can teach the faith. So people know what it is they believe when they go out into this world, and then use that faith to understand the culture, so that we use the lens through which we view the world around us, in the good, the bad, and the ugly, is our faith. That this is the thing that primarily determines how we respond to things. So this is a major first step, knowing what we believe and then being able to put that into use. Integrating faith and work. This is talking about something that Luther and others, Luther wrote a lot about it, seeing your work as a vocation, as a calling. And that no matter what task it is that that you're doing in this world, whether it's as a student or a manager, a pastor, a teacher, you can just list off all of the jobs that are out there, no matter what they are. This is your calling. This is where God has put you. And where God has put you is the place where faith is to be integrated into your work. So that means as you do your work, your faith is there. It's not something that's kind of separated out and, well, I've got my work life and I've got my church life, and rarely do the two intersect. But that, and this isn't meaning that you got to have, turn your cubicle at work into some sort of prayer shrine or something like that scares people off. That's not what this means. But it's meaning that you live this kind of life where faith is integrated into what you do. And it's part of who you are. You're not one person here and somebody else over there. Your life is, and your work, your faith and work are integrated together. Political, but not partisan. Political meaning here, being involved with the world. There are issues that are political, shall we say. Homelessness, right to life. All these other kinds there are issues that we care deeply about and that we want to, and we have something to say to the culture. But we don't do it in such a way that we get lined up with one political party or one leader or something like that. We speak independently into that culture. It's not my job. We're going to have elections here. We are having one in Ontario. It's not my job to tell you who to vote for. I tried that once in a Bible class in my first church. It lasted 30 seconds, and I learned my lesson pretty quickly that that's not a I knew it already. It was kind of a rookie mistake, and never again. You don't say stuff because while we care very deeply about what's going on around us, it's not our place here to endorse one candidate or another. You see this in some American churches, during their elections where, the presidential candidates, both sides, end up in churches on Sunday morning, and churches are sort of endorsing their message. I don't think so. That's drifting into one of the two ditches. Where we deeply care, but we're not, here to champion one political party over another. Working to make society a more just and good place. These are clinging to values that are sometimes hard to find in the world today. Making the world just, seeking that which is good in our communities. Now, there's always going to be somebody who says what you think is good is not what I think is good, and yada, yada, yada. But I think there still is a broad enough consensus in society about what the basic good things are that we need to be doing that. And we still have again, what's just for one isn't necessarily just for the other, and people can get wound up about things like this. But there is still, by and large, a consensus about what is just and what is fair. And that's what we, in our own lives, need to be working towards. Being guided by biblical notions of justice. We don't have time to unpack this one. Rather than secular ideological accounts. What we need to be doing is talking about justice as the Bible sees it. Which isn't necessarily the world's understanding of justice at all. The world's understanding, of justice in some cases has been, a certain segment of society is perceived to have been oppressed for a long time. The ideological way of responding to that is, well, let's elevate those people now, and everybody else who's been kind of perceived to have been doing well as a result of how things have worked for a long time, let's squash them down instead. Now, that's ideology. You're going to find that in the Bible. That's not there. The ideology, the biblical understanding of justice is that we lift up the oppressed, but we don't do so at the expense of everybody else. This isn't we squash one so that others can succeed kind of thing. We work to bring everybody along and integrate people, and so we don't get caught up in the ideologies of the world. And instead stick with the biblical understandings of justice and fairness and of life itself. And then engaging in conversations with non-believers. As I said a few weeks ago, this is something I don't often get to do. I mean, because most of my social contacts, most of my interactions during the week are with you guys and people from other churches. But you're on the front lines of this. You see people every day, interact with people every day who are non-believers. And, rather than just ignoring them, turning a cold shoulder, oh, they're all non-believers, yada, yada, yada. We want to engage with them. We want to talk with them and do so with civility, humility, patience, and above all else, love. That's just an introduction to some things that I've gleaned and will continue to undoubtedly talk about as we go through this, of what it means to engage with the culture. And I'd be eager to hear any feedback, comments, questions, observations, arguments that you might have on that subject. How do you find it as you engage with this world that is increasingly less oriented to the message of the Scriptures? James, sir.
I would say that you can take an issue and both believers and non-believers can come to the same conclusion of how it is to be handled. The reason for doing it, there is no crossover. I mean, I'll give you an example. We are to serve the poor.
Pardon me, sorry.
Serve the poor.
Okay, sir. Yeah, we are to serve the poor. Mm-hmm.
But when you get with a comment like, well, yes, I'm ready to devote funds to that because none of this is mine. So you say that to a non-believer, they think there's something dreadful wrong.
Oh, yes.
What do you mean the money's not yours?
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're brushing up against the same sort of thing that I'm talking about here. Just for those who couldn't hear, James was talking about supporting and working with organizations in the community that, for example, work with the homeless or and other things to help them. And a lot of those organizations increasingly are not necessarily aligned with a church. And as you talk to them and engage with them about that, this is, you'll say things like, yeah, I'm going to support you because this is not, what I have is not really my own. It's a gift from God. And yeah, they're going to look at you like you got 3 eyes and a horn, because that isn't how they look at the world. But that's exactly what we're doing. We're engaging with that world, and we're wanting to invite conversation with that world. Well, let me tell you about why this is not my own, or may try to help you understand why I have that particular view, of things. Exactly. Yeah, Kier.
I guess with respect to culture, one of the things that is so challenging is somewhere along the line, I don't know exactly how it happened, the message of Christianity is seen to be a hostile message. People react as if it's a hostile thing. That somehow in this message, I'm going to harm you with this. And that culture, that ideology, like where does that come from? Because there is no connection.
Right.
It is the most benign and loving message that could be.
Yeah, yeah.
But they feel like it's a hostile thing that you're going to harm me and bring this.
Yes, okay, good comment. The world will sometimes respond to us with, they want to keep us at a distance because they perceive Christianity to be hostile or to be, a problem on society. I mean, first of all, I would just say, and we'll just get this dealt with this quickly. There's some things the church has done, that have come to light that.
That's not the church, that's
That's people, exactly. But, in their mind, it's all the same. So we have to acknowledge, yep, there are some chapters of the story as a church we're not very proud of and we need to repent of. The bigger issue, I would argue, that's going on is that, the sinful mind, meaning there the mind of the unregenerate person, is hostile to God. What a lot of people are dealing with is they don't want this to be true. Because if this is true, then this is going to have some really big implications for their lives, and they don't want it to be true. And so the way I can keep it from being untrue is make it untrue for me, and I'll just be hostile to you. And that gets into other things as well. And some of, and we see some of that where there is, even at a societal level, a kind of a hostility to the Christian message and to involvement of Christians in things, because there is, a fear that religion in Christianity in particular, has overall, on balance, had a negative effect on the world. Now, we would argue and see that very, very different. But, I'll go back to something that I mentioned earlier in January as I was doing some research for one of the early lessons in this. I came across a piece that was written here in Ontario by just who off the top of my head, I can't remember. Anyway, it was some government agency. And they were actually, this was the government, arguing that religion has overall had a positive impact on society. Now, why would they be writing that? Well, because a lot of people don't see it that way. That wouldn't be something that they wouldn't have had to write that 75 years ago. Because the consensus was, no, faith is an overall plus to society. But there are those out there, voices now that go, no, we want to make society is entirely secular, and the church has, no place really within that society, except for those who believe and they should just kind of keep it to themselves on Sunday morning and do what they do, and yeah. But yeah, there is. The sinful mind is hostile to God, and the evil one is, stoking the flames a little bit. Brian, yes, sorry, I saw your hand.
Following up on all of the discussion of the separation of church and state, and it's quite interesting, because historically, the Christian side, for hundreds of years ago, and some of the things that happened, as you supposedly were a Christian state, and then of course even in the Muslim side and the other side, when you all of a sudden, if you hold to the faith where you've got to destroy the infidel. I mean, it's like you can go too far the other way of those non-Christian religions, and so I mean, is it good the way we've come now? But like we're saying, we shouldn't get involved in politics to the extent of forcing it on people.
Yeah.
We like to elect our leaders who are Christian if we know they're Christian, because we believe in positive things that will come out of that.
Yeah.
Yet we can't expect that we're going to force our ways on everyone in society.
No.
When we're not an overall Christian society.
No, that's right.
It's a hard thing to...
It is, yeah. It is a very, very hard thing. Christianity did for the first, ever since of European contact in North America, has enjoyed a very, privileged place in society. And in some places even more privileged than what we've experienced, say here in Ontario, or I grew up with out west. And that's all changed. But at the same point in time, and other views have come in, and so this makes it, this is what makes this particularly a challenging time, because just not everybody is inclined to give us that place anymore. I would argue that we should actually, what I'm trying to get across here is that we need to actually embrace these times. This is actually more faithful to where the church was 2,000 years ago than where it was 500 years ago. The early church had no privileged place in society. In fact, it was persecuted, and it struggled, and it had its problems, and lo and behold, it grew like a weed as people, faithfully engaged with the society. I mean, it was greatly helped when it became the official, religion of the Roman Empire, yada, yada, yada. But even before then, I mean, Christianity had to get to a certain point to get to that. And that all happened in those first 300 years where the church was persecuted and tormented and yet grew, because it had found ways to engage with society. It presented a different worldview that people found actually quite compelling. And in a certain sense, what we're called to do is to, in a certain, very real way, rediscover that. The same thing happened during the Babylonian exile. The Israelites went back, more of them than had left. Or there were more of them, not all of them went back. But as they engaged, they grew in influence and position. Yeah. Pastor Hahn.
When you started off, you mentioned about being built up in our own faith. One of the things I've found is people find it very difficult to express their faith. In fact, they say, well, we need more training. We need more, teachings and how to do evangelism, whatever. I think we as Lutherans, we are uniquely blessed in having gifts like Luther Small Catechism.
Yes.
We put a lot of stress on, for example, confessing the creeds every Sunday, one or the other. What a wonderful tool that is in knowing what it is that I believe, and it gives me the words in many cases that I can share with somebody else on a given topic, whether that's, what do you believe about capital punishment? I've got views on that. They're based on Scripture. What do I believe about faithfulness between husbands and wives, gender, and so forth. Those are wonderful tools that we have. A lot of times we kind of relegate them to, when we were little kids going through confirmation class, and then we graduate from that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was just listening to a podcast the other day where in some of our past, there used to be confirmation or services on a Sunday evening that would concentrate on teaching the catechism. Morning worship, with your appointed lessons, but there would be evening services concentrating on the catechism, and you go through the catechism in the course of the year.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, good point. That we don't forget the resources God has given, that we have, that we've inherited, ultimately from God, but through those who have come before us. Luther's Catechism being among them, the creeds, the Lord's Prayer. These are the things. The church Christians aren't going to get better at sharing their faith by doing more role playing. In fact, most of us hate role-playing. I'd rather have a root canal than sit and do role-playing with somebody. But we're going to get better at sharing our faith. First of all, I think as we use those resources that you mentioned, and Luther, for example, the guy who wrote the Catechism. He said, though I am a doctor, I do as a child. And he never got beyond it in a certain sense. That was one of the touch points for him, and as he knew that and brought that into his own life, that helped. And then too, being more open about, talking about the faith in the home, where we have devotions, where we take time personally in the Scriptures and that sort of thing, so that we get comfortable using the language of the faith so that it becomes a little bit more part of our normal conversation. That doesn't mean we need to be amening and hallelujahing everything somebody else might say and kind of make ourselves look silly, but our faith, begins to percolate into conversation a little bit more naturally, and that's all part of it too. Yeah. All right. This is all stuff we'll come back to. As I said, I'm working through this book, and as I see connections between what we're doing, I won't hesitate to, as a straightforward a manner as possible, with very few footnotes and few words that I don't understand, bring you along on the journey. We have just a few minutes left, but we get to see an example in Deuteronomy chapter 2 of what engaging the faith looks like, engaging rather with culture looks like from the position of faith. Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And we won't have time to go through the whole thing here today, but we'll at least set the story, and then we'll do the digging and talk about the dream itself next time. Chapter 2 of Daniel begins with and I'm just going to read it from the Pew Bible here, but you can kind of see the outline on the screen of what's going on here. Nebuchadnezzar begins to have some interesting dreams. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. Anybody here can relate to Nebuchadnezzar once in a while? Yeah, okay, we've all been there. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, the wise men of his court, to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." So they're called in. They're asked to give a little bit of interpretation. Problem is, they don't know the dream. The king replied to the astrologers, or the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." The king replied, "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into a pile of rubble." Seems like a bit of an impulsive king. Anyway, I was going to say something else, but I won't. I'll just shut up. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Right. I'm going to tell you what I dreamed. I want you to tell me what I dreamed, and then I want you to tell me what that dream means. Anybody up to the challenge? All right. Well, once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it." The king answered, "You're just stalling for time, aren't you? I am certain you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is just one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." The astrologers answered the king, "There is not a man on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods. And they do not live among men." You got to hang on to this little phrase here, because this is their culture. This is their world. This is a matter for the gods. And where are the gods? Not with people, right? They're off in their own little world, the gods are. Okay? So this is, they're giving us, we get a little hint here as to the culture. The gods are in their own world. They not terribly concerned about what's going on here. And so we can talk to them, but that isn't necessarily going to help. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men, not just the saps who had come before him, but all of them, everybody. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. Now, Daniel hasn't been involved in this at all, but he's among this group, and so he, like all the rest, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are also going to be put to death. Everybody is going to die. But then Daniel begins to engage, and we'll just read this very quickly, and we'll talk about it next time. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out and put to death the wise men of gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom. In the ESV, it's prudence, carefully. He doesn't just kind of go, "Hey, I got your answers here, my friend." He's very careful about this. He doesn't presume anything. He's wise in his approach to things here. With wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the whole matter to David. At this, David went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. So Daniel asked some questions. Why is this going on? What's the issue here? He requests time with the king. Doesn't just march in, but does this respectfully. And then, as we see in the next few verses, he returns to his house, explains the matter to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he urges them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. So they approach this by, we know of a God who actually does want to talk to people, and so we're going to pray, and the mystery is revealed. All right, we'll talk about all of this more in detail next time, but we're beginning to see here how Daniel begins to engage with the culture at a point where the culture can, in fact, be engaged, and the result that it has. Let's leave it there for today, and we'll move on. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are in a world that is beset with all kinds of challenges to the faith. We ask, Lord, that you would help us to respond to those carefully, faithfully, engaging the culture where we can, and bringing your word to those who so desperately, desperately need to hear it. Give us courage in that work, Lord, and strengthen us for service to you. Bless and be with us this day. Keep us safe on the roads. Bless those who are coming to worship this morning and those who have been to worship already, granting us your peace, forgiveness, love, and joy. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. We'll do some resetting here for the church service, but thank you for your good comments, and we'll push ahead with the rest of Nebuchadnezzar's dream next week.